Hello, Writing 100 students. I hope you're all doing well. In today's lesson, we are going to look at the introduction to an argumentative essay. Okay? Um, Once you understand the argumentative essay, you will be able to formulate your own essay. So I want you to really pay attention to each and every single detail that I'm sharing with you because you will use that once you start producing your own essay. All right? Um, I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see what I'm seeing. All right. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at is what is an argumentative? So in this lecture, we're going to look at the definition. We're going to identify the purpose. We're going to recognize the structure of an argumentative essay because there is a particular structure that you follow. We're going to see how we're going to apply the peel method. Yes, you have done the peel method. You know how to do it now. This is the essay you're going to share it with us, okay? And then also we're going to look at how to avoid common errors. So let's start off with the basic information of what is an argumentative essay, all right? So imagine a debate. You have your opposition, okay? You have your stance, you have your claim. And in a debate, you have also a person opposite from you who has a different opinion. And what do? You argue your points back and forth. So, an argumentative essay is you are standing on a clear position on a debatable issue and you support it with logical reasoning and evidence. Okay, so you take a position, you have to choose. Are you arguing for or against something? Are you agreeing or disagreeing? Okay, you cannot do both. However, this is the hard part. Even if you are against something, you still have to acknowledge that your opponent might be uh, having the opposite idea than you. So, yes, you do not change positions. You stay with one position. However, you do have to acknowledge what your opponent might be counter arguing. All right. So, the first thing is you take a position, decide, am I for this thing or am I against this thing? Do I think this is a good thing or do I think it's a bad thing? Choose one position only. Then you use evidence. You support your position with facts, statistic, quotes from experts, real life examples. Okay. We have done this in the Peel method when we showed about evidence. This is the part you're going to do evidence. And then you're going to give very logical reasoning. So your argument must be well structured and organized. When somebody listens to it or reads it, they need to be able to follow your argument clearly and coherently. All right? The opponent or the writer needs to anticipate what the opposite viewer might think. That's why I say with an argumentative, yes, you have one position, you stick to one thought, but you have to acknowledge that your opponent may come to you with something opposite and you need to be prepared to argue against it. Okay? That is the only little bit challenging aspect of an argumentative. You're not just talking about your opinion over and over again. You have to say, well, even though climate change might be this, however, I believe this and this and this and this. All right. So, oh, sorry, you do not say I believe because with argumentative, you never ever share your opinion. Okay? So that is an argumentative essay. You pick a side, right? What is the purpose of an argumentative essay? Well, to persuade. And I believe in the reading class, we are now doing pathos, ethos, and logos, right? The persuasion. Yeah, you're going to do it here. You have to persuade, you convince your reader that your position on an issue is valid and well supported. You want them to walk away either changed or you want them to at least consider your argument. So it needs to be convincing. The purpose of it is also to inform and educate. How do we do that? By providing facts, research, perspective that they may not have considered. Okay. Also, it helps us to critically develop our own thoughts because it shows that you can evaluate evidence, you can weigh different viewpoints, you can reason through very complex ideas, and most importantly, you can show me that you are aware that another person may have a different opinion and that you are ready for them because you will be addressing that in your argument. And of course, you're participating in academic discourse. Okay. So this is academic thinking, language. Okay. Research language, academic skills. All of that is the purpose of an argumentative essay. What is it not? All right. It's not a personal opinion. So you're not going to use words like I believe, I think. No, you're not going to use that. It's not a descriptive essay. You're not going to describe a situation for me. All right. You're not going to summarize a different viewpoint. No, you have to have a point. You need to say, when universities, okay, increase class sizes, it systematically shows that students will perform worse in their academic skills. All right. That is my stance. Now I need to support my stance. You're not describing a situation, you're stating, you're claiming. And one more thing with an argumentative, what it is not. It is not emotional and it's not bigoted and it's not prejudice, all right? Because that's where you will lose your audience. It's important that you stay on facts and that everything circles right back for you to look objective and not subjective or biased. All right. That's why your evidence and your language is so important so that you do not come across as discriminatory, emotional, you cannot reason, you are bigoted, you maybe have racial use of language. No, you want to be as objective as possible. Okay? What is the structure of an argumentative essay? Remember at the beginning, we talked that an essay always has these four structures, but in an argumentative, you have five. Okay? One, you have your introduction. Remember, we talked about a hook, background, thesis. Remember that in the reading class. Now you're going to use that information and do it in the writing class. Then you do body paragraph one and you apply the peel method. You give us the first reasoning. What is your first reasoning for thinking this way? Class sizes should be considered in higher education. Okay. What is your first reasoning? Well, students tend to perform better when class sizes are smaller. Then you give your evidence. Show me how does that come to your conclusion? All right. Then you give me an explanation and then you link it right back. You do that with paragraph one and you do it with paragraph two. Then this is the fun part. Counter argument and rebuttal. Now, counter argument is what you perceive your opponent might say. They might say, well, you know what? Class sizes actually is not the direct cause. Or you can say something opponents or opponents to smaller class sizes or administrations that oppose smaller class sizes, they do not see that it impacts students' academic performance. However, then you refute that information. Rebuttal, refute. That is what you're doing. Okay. So that is the fourth one. So it's one paragraph literally acknowledging what your opponent might be thinking, but you're still refuting it. Okay. Then the last part is the conclusion, which is you restate the thesis. All right. So you repeat your topic sentence, you summarize with a strong closing where you call to action. How does that happen? Well, you can say something like, from this evidence that we have seen in this essay, it's a clear indicator that higher education institutions need to do better when it comes to enrollment and class sizes and resources. More resources need to be allocated to employing more teachers so that class sizes decrease, for example. So you are calling to action. All right. And the very last thing, because you are using in-text citation, you will need a reference list. Okay. we have practiced this before. Whatever you cite inside your essay needs to come in the reference list. You cannot have the one or the other. Otherwise, it's plagiarism. Okay? Right. So, the first part I'm going to look at, and I'm just going to glance over it because we are going to break this up into pieces, is the introduction. Now, the introduction, as I said to you guys before, you're looking at the main topic, and your hook needs to grab the attention of the reader. And remember, we said a hook can either be a quote that will shock people, or a famous quote from a person who is in a particular field that you are focusing on. All right. It can also be a story, but the narrative needs to grab the people's attention. All right. That's your hook. Then after your hook, you provide background information of why you mentioned that hook. What is significant about it? And then after that, you give us your thesis statement. Okay. If you don't know this now, it's okay. We are going to do this step by step. I'm not going to just throw you into the wolves. We're going to do this part by part. You will produce, give it to me, I give you feedback. Then you produce again, you give it to me, and then I give you feedback. All right. Once you have your introduction, you're going to look at your body paragraphs. And of course, I mentioned you will use the peel method. Super easy. Remember the peel method? Point. Give us what is the main reasoning one. Okay. Then you give us evidence for that reasoning. Then you explain that reasoning. How does this connect back to your main topic? And then you link it right back, okay, to the topic sentence. All right. And then you have the counter argument. Now, the counter argument is when you acknowledge the opposing view fairly. So you're not there to bigot, okay? You're not there to be emotional. No, you need to be as objective as possible and say, you know what? People may have, okay, or supporters of larger classroom sizes have a point that at times it doesn't impact, a student's academic performance. However, it often assumes that all students can perform at the same level with less contact with the professor, because the larger the classroom is, the less contact students have with the professor. Okay, so something like that. So you give a counter argument and then you give a rebuttal. So a rebuttal is is the refuting of that counter argument. Okay, so you'll say something like, some sources argue that we will still do not know where eels come from because no one has ever seen them pre-produce. However, it overlooks the strength of scientific inferences, okay? Science often relies on direct evidence to research reliable conclusions. So you want to refute, you want to argue against your opponent. All right. Then you have your conclusion, where we say you restate your thesis in different words. Do not copy word for word. Okay. We've learned how to paraphrase. You summarize the key points you've made in your body paragraph. So you're going to say because of reason one and two. And then you end with a strong closing statement or a call to action. And I always say the call to action is the easiest because it helps you navigate your writing, okay? Because sometimes it's hard to just close it off. So often use a call to action. So something like, therefore, it is important that higher educational institutions need to redirect their resources and funding to hire better teachers and more teachers so that classroom sizes are at uh, are at a acceptable number so that students can enjoy more contact and feedback from the professor. Okay, so something like that. And then you have your reference list. And this is something that I have to stress out with you guys because I realized in your previous submissions that some of you did so well with your in-text citation, but you didn't provide a reference list. You need to provide it, okay? It's basically the bibliography at the end. It should have the proper title, which is reference. It needs to be in alphabetical order. It needs to be on a new page. And remember, because this is a social science paper, not a medical paper, we have to use the APA format. And just one more thing, what to avoid in an argumentative essay. Now, or writing or speech. First of all, is way vague or weak points. When your point is not clear, we don't know if you are for or against. Avoid that. Be clear. Tell us that you are for something or against something. And each of your reasonings need to be clear. We need to say, oh, this is reason number one. This is reason number two. Okay? So be very specific with your language. When you are stating opinions, we do not want to have that in an argumentative essay. I believe, okay, this is true. No, remove the I believe. You stick to the third person singular. You use institutions, researchers, some, people, whatever, but do not use the pronoun I. Ignoring the counter argument. That actually will make you fail because now what you're doing is you're just arguing your point, but without recognizing that there are people that may have different thoughts. That this will actually make you fail your paper. So you want to acknowledge your counter argument. You want to say, though people believe that this is better, however, this and this and this and that. Okay, you need to do that. Plagiarism. Emotional argument. Do not argue with emotions. Okay. I know that in the reading class, we talked about pathos, but there's a way you use the pathos. You don't use it as an emotional claim. No, you use it as something where you can say it is a real life scenario that you want somebody to consider, but don't use it as your actual claim or your evidence. All right. And summarizing instead of arguing. Don't summarize an article. No, pick your side. Argue. This is what you're supposed to do. And you need to prove that it's correct. Okay? So that's what you need to avoid. So let's look at a quick comprehension check. I want you to do this for yourself. I want you to kind of, have an idea, an understanding. And all of this information, by the way, it is in your Writing 100 course reader, uh, page 71 to 74. All right. So, what is the main purpose of an argumentative essay? Very easy. It is there to take a stance, to take a claim, to develop critical and academic thinking, okay? To produce academic discourse. What are the four parts of the Peel method? What are the four parts of the Peel method? Point, evidence, explain, and link. All right. What is a thesis statement and where does it appear in the essay? The thesis is your main argument and it is the last sentence in the introduction. All right. What is a counter argument and why is it important to include one? The counter argument is your opponent. What are other people thinking? And you need to include it because it shows that you are considering other viewpoints. All right. Name two things you should avoid when writing an argumentative essay. Ask yourself, name two things. One, being emotional, and two, not stating facts. That's it. All right. So I hope this gives you an overview of it, what an argumentative essay is. I'm going to give you a small task that you need to do, and it's basically just an outline to help you see the parts of it. The moment you understand the parts of an argumentative and what they could look like, then it's easier for you to put it together for yourself. All right. This is the end of the lecture. I'm going to upload this on YouTube, and I will see you guys on Wednesday.